Okay, here's a good one. This one is about crosswinds. This is about crosswinds, and I do find that many student pilots, crosswinds is an interesting topic for many people. And many student pilots suffer in this area, both knowledge-wise, but really execution-wise, which is the most important. How should I put this? If you told me, you said, hey, Yoel, I could only do one. I can't do both, meaning I can either execute properly when it comes to landing with a crosswind, or I could possess the knowledge of proper crosswind. I can't have both, which, by the way, we all should have both. But assuming hypothetically that you said, Yoel, I could only have one, which one should I have? The answer is obviously execute a proper crosswind landing, regardless. And I don't care what you know or don't know about it, as long as you execute and you're safe. Now, this is just to drive a point home. Obviously, we should both understand it and execute it. And by the way, executing it without understanding it is a very difficult thing for me to imagine to be possible. But that's how important the execution part of crosswind landings and takeoffs really is. Some things in flight training comes down to knowledge. But with crosswinds, we really need to know how to execute it. So here we go. This is from a man named Jacob. I'll read the email and then I will talk a little bit about Jacob's email. And for those of you watching this and you're wondering, what the heck am I doing here? Well, this is what I call Ask Yoel series, where I literally read emails that I receive. As always, I always say this, but I keep trying. I do try and get through all of them, and it lately increasingly seems to be, increasingly impossible for me to get through all of them just because I don't have the time. But every once in a while, I'll get a good email with a topic that I find many people struggle with as well. So I figure I could knock out one person's email, and hopefully this many of you could relate, and this could appeal to many of you guys at the same time. So this is an example of it. So if you have a topic, a question, something you want me to talk about, send me an email. There's an email in the description of this video. The only thing I ask is in the subject line of the email, just type in the words Ask Yoel. 2 words, Ask Yoel. That way, just because the sheer number of emails that are coming in, that way we're able to separate between any email and your email being a topic that you want me to discuss here. So Ask Yoel if you are sending an email. So here we go. Hi Yoel, I'm digging the new style videos as you've always managed to break the complex down into simple terms I can understand. Well, thank you, Jacob. Not sure if this email will even reach you, as I'm sure you receive plenty, but figured I'll shoot my shot. Yes, you did, Jacob, and it did reach me, so excellent. I've been flying for a few years now, private pilot only, and while I generally feel comfortable while flying, something that always has and still very much does intimidate me are crosswinds, mostly while landing. I know at this point it should be something I'm comfortable with, but I'm just not. I think I understand the concept and what's required to land in a crosswind, but for some reason when I do, the landing isn't pretty. That's a mild way of putting it. That's a nice way of putting it. Any words of advice would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, Jacob. Jacob. First of all, thanks for the email. And like I said before, when I receive an email that many people, not only Jacob, many people deal with and struggle with or feel challenged by, it's great because this way I could talk about it, and then many of you out there watching this could relate, hopefully. So the first thing that comes to my mind anytime anyone talks to me about difficulty in crosswind, and this has been a constant for years, the first thing that pops in my brain, in my little small brain, is, generally speaking, and I don't know your situation, Jacob, but generally speaking, poor or improper crosswind technique, generally speaking, comes from lack of crosswind practice or lack of exposure to crosswind conditions, okay? And generally speaking, the reason some pilots are exposed to crosswinds a lot less than others has a lot to do with their personal minimums, be it spoken, unspoken, conscious or not conscious or subconscious. Oftentimes, there's many pilots out there who look at the winds at the airport, and if they even sound a little high, they just don't go fly. And that's a whole separate issue, which I'll talk about on a whole other video, because there is such concept in flight, in not really flight training, but in flying in general, in aviation, where people's personal minimums are too low or high. What am I trying to get at? If someone too low. I think that's what I'm looking for. Where someone's personal minimums should be loosened a little bit. And there's many pilots who actually deal with this. Their personal minimums are so stringent, they're so tight that it works against them, because what happens is they end up not exposing themselves to situations which would increase and better their technique in many areas, not just crosswind. So that's a video for a whole other time. But the first thing I'll say, Jacob, the first thing that comes to mind, not just with you, but anyone who mentions a lack of crosswind proficiency, is there's probably a lack of exposure to crosswinds. Okay, that's the first thing I'll say. So the first thing I'll say off the bat is, after watching this video, I want you to try, even though this video is not about loosening your personal minimums, I want you to try and get out there and literally look for crosswind conditions, and I want you to train in them. I actually have a video, this reminds me, I have a video on the channel where I tell one of my students why it's so important to capitalize and take advantage of crosswind conditions. Because if you think of all the things in flying, in aviation, we could pretend, what's the word? Emulate? I think that's the word. Correct me in the comments if that's not the word. But we could basically make pretend many situations. For instance, we could pretend your engine's on fire, right? And then we could run through that procedure. We could pretend that you are experiencing an emergency, any emergency, and then we could run through and talk about what we're going to do in this situation. But one thing we can't pretend, we can't emulate, we can't create, that is crosswinds. We cannot cause the wind. There's no switch that I could turn up the wind from a certain direction, unless you're in a simulator. But in the real world, while I could pretend 101 different things, we can't pretend there's a crosswind. There's no such thing. I can't just come towards the airport crabbing to the runway as if there's a crosswind, unless, of course, I'm forward slipping the thing. We can't create crosswinds, which, again, is also part of the reason many pilots are not exposed to it as much as we should be. We can't create it. There's no way for us to turn the crosswind on. So the other thing I'll say, before I even talk about crosswind technique and all that, because again, Jacob, I suspect your issue here is not needing to hear another CFI regurgitate which rudder and aileron to have in. You've probably heard that 100 times in your life, and you don't need me to do the same, even though I will just touch on it because maybe that's what you're looking for. But reading your email, and not just you, most people who struggle with crosswinds has more to do with the things I'm talking about than them not knowing which rudder pedal to press when the wind is coming from a certain direction, okay? So, first thing, like I said, crosswind exposure. If your personal minimums are too tight, loosen them a little bit. I'm not telling you to be reckless. I'm not telling you to do things you can't handle, but go out there and just get a little comfortable with being uncomfortable, okay? And your landing at first might not be pretty. You might sideload the thing a little bit. Fine. That little price is worth your crosswind proficiency coming up. and your comfort with crosswind getting a little better. Because it's about our relationship with things. You see what I'm saying? It's about your relationship with crosswinds that might be the thing that's preventing you from even encountering them in the real world. Because again, you might be someone who doesn't go fly when it's too windy. So loosen your personal minimums a little bit. The second thing I'll say is we can't recreate crosswinds. We can't create crosswinds, I should say. So because of that, start viewing crosswinds as opportunities. Anytime you see, the winds are coming from, I don't know, whatever the runway orientation at your airport is, direct crosswind. If you can, get out to the airplane and get training, because there's no switch that we could turn the crosswinds on or off. Okay, it's either there or it's not there, and the best we could do is get into the airplane and train and operate in that environment while it's happening before it's gone. Because oftentimes the crosswind is gone. And then you're left with no crosswind. And again, we're unable to train our crosswind and bring up that crosswind proficiency. So start viewing crosswind situations as opportunities. Example, you're flying to a buddy of yours and you're 20 miles out. You're listening to the ATIS, and the ATIS is reporting the winds coming from blah, blah, blah at blah, 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 maybe even gusting. And it's a straight crosswind. Instead of going, maybe I'll divert, or maybe I'll fly around for 30 minutes and wait for it to calm down. What I want you to do is sort of start getting excited and feel like, this is an opportunity for me to sharpen my crosswind knife, to sharpen my crosswind skills, and to actually put the knowledge, which I know you do have. You see, I know you have the knowledge. I'm sure if you were sitting right here and I asked you what rudder pedal and aileron deflection you need with a right crosswind, you would have the answer, right? You've been at this for a few years. That's not your issue. Your issue is that relationship you have with crosswinds. So when you hear a crosswind situation, I want you to start training your brain to go, excellent, excellent. I'm going to practice my crosswind. Heck, maybe even have your friend wait a few minutes while you do a few loops in the pattern, taking advantage of that crosswind situation before it's gone. Taking advantage of that crosswind situation before it's gone, because we can't turn it on or off. Not only that, we can't buy it. There's no amount of money in the world that you could pay to turn the crosswind on at your airport. Do you ever think of that? Did you ever think of this? It's a very interesting thought, right? It's a very interesting concept. Crosswinds are either there, and we could choose to sharpen our skills while they're there, or they're not there. And there's nothing else we could do about it. Think about that. Let that sink in. I want you to start thinking of crosswinds as opportunities. Think of crosswinds as opportunities. Now, this doesn't mean, like I said before, to be reckless. This doesn't mean that if your crosswind proficiency is lacking, then I want you to go out to the airport when it's a straight 40-knot crosswind gusting to 50. This doesn't mean that. No, I want you to stay home that day. Okay? But what this does mean is that whatever the number of wind velocity you've been comfortable up to this point, pick that thing up by 5 or 10 knots. 10 knots. It won't kill you, the 10 knots. It will make your landing not pretty, but pick it up by about 5 to 10 knots. And see what that feels like. See what that looks like, and you'll be amazed. Not only will your crosswind technique get better, but you'll start finding out that the only way to increase your crosswind proficiency is actually taking off and landing in crosswind conditions. Because unlike many other things in flying, the theory is great, but there's only so much we could talk about crosswind technique. At some point, we have to do it. Okay? Now, simulators are great. If you could get your hands on one and get into a simulator, I'm thinking of full motion simulators. They're fantastic. But even not full motion simulators, I'm thinking there might be some value there. But again, nothing beats being in the airplane and feeling that wind and putting in those corrections and seeing for yourself what happens when you don't put the correction or when you don't put enough correction. Okay? So what I want you to do is this. Reading your email, it sounds to me like your issue is not knowledge. Your issue is the intimidation factor. It's your relationship with crosswinds. And you're not alone. The number of people who have been flying probably longer than you have, because I think you mentioned you've been flying a few years, who shy away and stay away from crosswinds is insane. It's insane. The crosswind proficiency that exists out there should be much higher, but it won't get higher with more knowledge. It will get higher by facing the discomfort, by getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and actually getting out there and doing it. And you'll be amazed. Crosswind landings and takeoffs are really not difficult. I know you might not believe me. They're not hard. They're not hard. Once you understand, and I'll finish with this, I'll talk about the inputs here like I said I will. But once you understand what we're doing in a crosswind, crosswinds go from being this whole weird, almost like shooting in the dark thing, right? Because I'm sure maybe this is true with you too. Like I fly with a bunch of student pilots and a bunch of newly rated pilots. And for the most part, I could tell you this, people's crosswind technique is at best shooting in the dark. It's almost like, whatever works. Oh, okay, we're on the ground. Great. Oh, I could breathe. That's kind of along the lines of what it looks like. There's very little thinking and methodical precision that goes into, at least from what I see. Maybe I just happen to fly with people who seem to shoot in the dark, but I'm pretty confident that that's the case across the board. And it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. Crosswind technique should be easily understood. What is it I'm doing? Why is it I'm doing it? And how much of it do I need? Okay? Because remember, it's not only about the technique, it's also about the amount, right? Sometimes I do an X technique at an X amount. Other times I do a Y technique at a different amount. It depends on what the wind's doing, right? So let me finish off by covering a little bit of the crosswind technique as far as the knowledge is concerned. And I hope this video will give you what you need. And again, as always, feel free to email me if you want to discuss this further. But I do suspect that as many other people that I come across, it's exposure. You just have to get out there and do it. Okay, so crosswind technique. If I'm coming into land and there's a crosswind, I know that I need to be doing stuff, right? Otherwise, from experience, you watching this could probably relate. Things get a little haywire and sideways, and you side load, and it's scary, and it's uncomfortable, and it's weird, and it gets your heart rate going. So what is it exactly that we need to do? So the thing about crosswinds and the thing about crosswind technique or corrections, here's what it comes down to. The main landing gear on your airplane, unlike your nose gear, do not move. They're fixed, okay? They're fixed just like that. Think of the rear wheel on your bicycle. The front wheel moves. The rear wheel is fixed. Think of the rear wheels in your car. They don't move. They're fixed. The front wheels move. The rear wheels in your car are fixed. Okay? Now, I'm speaking here of tricycle gear airplanes, even though this is true with a tail wheel, but it's a little less pronounced. So let's focus on tricycle gear airplanes. When we come in for a landing, we touch down on our main gear. Okay? Now back to all you need to remember throughout this entire thing is that our main landing gear is fixed. It's not moving. It's fixed. So here we go. Throughout final approach, coming into land, let's assume this is the airplane. If I'm coming into land, the runway's in front of me. Let's assume there's no wind. Well, from what we know about planes with wind or crab angles and wind correction angles, if I wish to maintain a certain track over the ground, if there's no wind, guess what? All I do is I point the plane in the direction I wish to move in. And the plane magically and beautifully moves in the direction that I pointed it in. Now, let's assume there's wind coming from the right. The runway, you're the runway. There's wind coming from the right. So if I keep coming towards you and I keep pointing towards you with wind from the right, guess what it will do? It will drift me off course. And that's no bueno. Why not? Because I want to land on the runway. I don't want to land in the grass. So we need to do something here. What do you think we need to do in order for the wind not to drift us all the way off course. You're right. If you guess we need to put in some wind correction angle or start pointing into the wind, you would be correct. Now that we point into the wind, guess what? We're pointing to the right, but we're moving towards the runway, meaning we're canceling out the amount that the wind would drift us. So we cancel it out by pointing towards the wind, and that way we continue moving straight towards the runway. Amazing. That's great. Question is, what happens when we show up to the pavement and we are in a condition that looks like this, literally pointing to the right? What did we say about your main landing gear before? They don't move, they don't turn, they're fixed. So if we landed sideways, what would happen? We call that side load. Not only would it be uncomfortable, it could potentially be damaging to the airplane. We don't want to do that. So we are right now in the midst of what I call the crosswind pickle. And the crosswind pickle is this. On the one hand, if I wish to stay on my final approach course and not drift off, I must turn and point into the wind and be sideways. On the other hand, if I do that and don't drift off and stay on course, I show up to the runway sideways and I side load. You hear the kasha, as we say where I come from? It's a big issue. On the one hand, I'm canceling out the wind. Okay, I'm not drifting. Great, I'm staying on course. On the other hand, if I do that, as I should, I'm showing up to the runway crooked. Big issue. It's a big pickle. It's what I call the crosswind pickle. How do we deal with the crosswind pickle? So if you say, forget the wind correction angle. Most important thing is come up to the runway straight. Well, if you wouldn't put the wind correction angle, you'd never reach the runway. You'd be in the grass because remember, you will drift. And if you say, okay, then side load. Well, what if you damage a landing gear? You hear the issue? I want you to pause the video and watch what I just said about 10 times if you need to, so you fully understand the crosswind pickle, so you understand the big $1 million issue with crosswinds. And again, you're starting to get and see why proper crosswind technique on touchdown is vital. Because we want to reach the runway. And the only way to reach the runway and not drift off into the field with a big fat crosswind is by showing up sideways. That's how airplanes work. It's like a boat with current. It's the same exact thing. Air is a fluid. So if I wish to reach the runway and there's a big fat crosswind, I'm showing up sideways. I don't have any other choice. If I would use it. If I had another choice, I would show up straight. I have to show up crooked if I wish to reach the runway and not off to the side. Okay, so you're saying, great, Yoel, if we have no choice but to show up crooked, then the crosswind correction or the crosswind technique must involve something about straightening the plane out last minute right before we touch down. And you'd be correct. So how do we straighten the plane out right before we touch down so that we don't what's called side load and potentially damage the landing gear? Because that's a lot of pressure. If you've side loaded before in a plane, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, if it's uncomfortable for you, imagine the pressure that tire, that the gear is taking with that big heavy plane. Just really, and the bigger the crosswind, the more sideways you're pointing, the more of a side load that will be. So it's really important to learn this proper crosswind technique. So here we go. Let's stick with our crosswind from the right. And this video is, I'm finding, quickly turning into a crosswind technique video, but it's really not. It's about your relationship with crosswinds. I might do a whole more further in-depth video about crosswinds, but this, I'll just spend a few minutes on this now. So back to our situation. We're showing up to the runway. We have a wind from the right. So we said we need to turn into the wind, point into the wind. So that way we're pointing there. but we're moving there. Excellent. Now we're showing up to the runway. We need to straighten out. So check this out. We have rudders and ailerons, okay? Meaning feet and hands. Feet and hand. Typically our other hand's on the throttle. So we have our rudders. We use them both and for different reasons. Now, before I tell you what we use and for what reason, let's first establish what we need to do. I just showed up to the runway and I'm pointing sideways. There's two things I need to do. Well, there's one thing I need to do, but if I don't do another thing, something will happen, and that is this. I really just need to straighten out. But if all I did was straighten out right before touchdown, guess what the wind will do? Blow me off to the side of the runway, if not all the way into the grass. So the two things I need to do is, one, straighten out, but two, keep myself somehow on the center line and not off to the side of the center line or worse, in the grass. So how do I do both these things? Well, I straighten the plane out with left rudder, meaning I yaw the plane, I yaw it, I bring it all the way from there to there. But if I only did that left rudder and nothing else, back to what we said a moment ago, now the wind is drifting me off to the side. Because remember, I haven't yet touched down. I'm 10 feet over the runway, 5 feet over the runway, 2 feet over the runway. So while I put in that left rudder, guess what I also put in? Right aileron. And now I'm almost dipping and canceling out the drift with a right dip of my wing. And this is where we always talk about that a perfect crosswind landing technique is where the wheel on the side from where the wind is coming from touches down first. Why do you think that is? Because if that wheel touched down first, it means you got that dip in there, and that's great, right? You want that little dip, touchdown, touchdown on that wheel. So there's two things happening. Left rudder, straighten the plane out, but that alone won't do much because now we'll drift while being straight. No good. We want to be straight and on center line. So left rudder and right aileron, dip it into the wind. That will cancel out the drift. You'll stay right over the center line, and then it'll be and then you'll roll out while keeping your aileron inputs into that wind. Keep that right wing down, planted on the ground so that wind doesn't flip you over all the way until you exit the runway. Don't just take the corrections out. So, not to get too in depth, maybe I already did. I'm known for it. But not to get too in depth, what was your name? I think it was Jacob. Jacob, I hope this video gave you a little bit of what you need when it comes to your crosswind stuff. I know I ended this with some knowledge, which I started out by saying I don't think you're missing knowledge, but I don't know. All I could go off is your email. But what I said before, really take it to heart. It's really important. Too many pilots out there are shying away from challenging situations. And it's hurting them. It's hurting them because if you keep shying away from crosswinds, you'll feel the way you do about crosswinds for the rest of your life. And that's not why you got your private. You got your private to get yourself in and out of airports even when conditions aren't perfect. I'll say it again. You got your private to get yourself in and out of airports even when conditions aren't perfect. Don't be reckless. Don't say I'm a private pilot and I'm cocky and Yol told me to get out there and loosen my personal minimum, so now I'll go and do crazy stuff that I can't handle. No, I'm not saying that. I want you to be smart and I want you to use your head. And if you are aware of yourself, if you know that you up to this point watching this video, Jacob or anyone else watching, are one of those pilots who has the tendency to shy away from challenging situations, all I'm asking you is loosen that up a little bit. And I want you to develop a whole new relationship with uncomfortable. And what you'll find on the other side of that is an incredibly, a much higher proficiency level of all these things that up to now you've been intimidated by. For Jacob, it happens to be crosswinds. But again, like I said, that's a whole other video where people's personal minimums that I find sometimes are so tight to where it hurts them. It hurts them because, again, they just stay home and they don't go out there and get better. So that's also an issue, right? Having your personal minimums too loose is a danger, but also having them too tight could potentially be a danger. Because what if one day you find yourself in a situation where proficiency would have saved you, and because your personal minimums were so tight for all these years, you never allowed your proficiency to increase to what you needed that day? So it's also an issue. So I'll talk about that in a whole other video, but this video is about crosswinds and about getting comfortable with uncomfortable in a smart way. Be methodical about it. Don't be stupid. Don't be reckless. All right. All the time we have for that, Jacob. I hope this helps. And for all of you, all the other viewers out there watching this, like I said in the beginning, if you have a topic you want me to discuss, a question, there's an email in the description below. Until next time, fly safe. And I'll see you all on the next one. Take care, you guys. Bye-bye. Hey guys, it's Yoel. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it answered some of your questions, confusion, whatever it might be, that I was able to help you in your own flight training journey. If you did enjoy the video and you did find it helpful, I would appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel and like the video. What that does with the YouTube algorithm is it kind of lets the AI way of letting YouTube know that there's some interest here and there's some helpful information for others, and that way YouTube will share this with other students or people who are going through flight training just like you. So if you do those things, it always helps, and I do appreciate it. Secondly, if you also have a topic, a question, a topic, a concern, confusion, whatever it might be that you want me to talk about on these videos here, go ahead and email me. There's an email in the description of this video below. So if you click on the description of the video, you'll see an email. Email that email with your question or topic, whatever it is you want me to talk about. And in the subject line of the email, write Ask Yoel, because this series is what I call Ask Yoel. So that way when the emails come in, we're able to separate them and know that your email is a topic you want me to discuss on these videos. Anyhow, hope it was helpful, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care.